and then we'll continue working with Councillor Back to make sure he can get connected to the meeting. Once again, I mentioned that Councillor Forbes has expressed regrets and will not be joining us for the meeting tonight. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated for the meeting tonight. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Okay, hearing none, will someone please move adoption of the agenda for the council workshop? I've got moved by Councillor Hanson. Is there a seconder on the matter? Seconded by Councillor Kern. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Tonight's workshop is for one purpose, and that is to hear council's financial plan deliberations. Oh, great. Looks like Councillor Back is able to join us too.
Thanks, Your Worship. Great. Yes.
Yeah, and so we started the budget process late last year with many of our capital plan discussions. We've gone and we introduced the work to the public. We had an opportunity for members of the public to provide their feedback, which brings us to tonight, which is the deliberations for council. And then the intent is from this point forward to return the meeting, the matter back to a regular meeting of council for April 4th for the next level of approval. And then we obviously have to have our budget passed and all in and signed off and properly done by the middle of May, as with all municipalities in the province. And so that is the point along the path that we're going towards. Tonight, we're going to just going to check in with staff. Do you have any additional comments before council shares their concerns about the budget? Mr. Daniluk on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a brief presentation before passing it back to yourself and council.
Okay, well, welcome. Go ahead.
Oops, just sharing my screen here. Whoops. Okay, just confirming I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, I can see it clearly.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public listening in. I'm Rick Daniluk, the Deputy General Manager of Finance and Deputy CFO. I have a very brief presentation before passing it back to the Mayor for tonight's budget deliberations. As the Mayor indicated, this is the last step in the financial planning process before the financial plan bylaw is presented for first 3 readings. This presentation will revisit the highlights included in this financial plan. It will review public input received during the process, review the changes recommended to be included in the plan, cover other considerations, and finally, next steps in the process. These the highlights listed on the screen are included in the financial plan workbook on page 5, not exactly as shown, but consolidated here for simplicity. They represent a combination of new investments and replacement and upgrading of existing infrastructure. The projects and initiatives included here will improve transportation choices, accelerate climate actions, reduce risk, improve emergency response times, support community health, continue to address affordability and housing needs, and enhance the well-being of residents. Following up on council direction provided last year, Finance and Communications collaborated on improvements to the public input process and launched a new public input forum supporting conversations on council's priorities and other topics of interest. This first step focused on quality over quantity and aims to increase and broaden community participation in the budget process over time. We'd like to thank the public for their input during this budget cycle. The themes that came up and activity levels are noted on this slide, and this year will serve as a benchmark for future improvement. Council asked for staff to follow up on a couple of items during the process. They've asked us to look at funding levels for community grants. We've done that. We've reviewed the current year grants and are recommending a one-time 10% increase to support increased demand. Additional funding was also secured for seniors and youth through Vancouver Coastal Health. And staff are now working on updating information on the community's social service needs, and will report back to Council on ongoing funding levels later this year. Council also expressed an interest in advancing the investment in public electric vehicle charging stations, and staff have recently confirmed a $190,000 senior government grant, which increases the total investment in this infrastructure to $790,000 over the next 3 years. And those investments start this year. Supporting electric vehicle adoption by increasing the availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure is one of the key actions identified in the Community Energy and Emissions Plan. A few other considerations. Despite higher levels of uncertainty in this year's plan, the proposed property tax increase remains at 3% and is amongst the lowest in the region. While inflation levels are high, they're expected to return to normal levels over the next couple of years. And while we're still assessing impacts from inflation, especially on the capital plan, an amendment to the capital plan may be required later this spring. A few obligations are stabilized through the use of surplus in this plan, including impacts from the RCMP contract. And the provincial budget, after review, appears to be well aligned with Council's priorities. Staff will be pursuing opportunities in the district's interests and bringing them back to Council. And the provincial budget includes provisions for housing and homelessness, care facilities, climate adaptation and mitigation, public safety, and Indigenous relations. Staff are also participating in discussions on municipal finance reform to support a more financially resilient region. Topics that benefit the district include fairness in property assessment methodologies and the appeals process, which are impacting our businesses, development finance, and ensuring growth pays for its impacts in the region, which is impacting all of our ratepayers, and more clearly defining our local government's role in emerging services so we can help accelerate change in the region. Next steps in the process include adoption of the financial plan bylaw with first 3 readings March 21st and adoption on April 4th. The tax distribution workshop is scheduled for the middle of April. An update on the long-term financial plan is scheduled for May, followed by updates to developer charges to ensure they're keeping pace with rising costs. And the annual report will be released later in June. I'll conclude by saying our current approach does limit spending to ensure we remain competitive in the region, and also focuses on investments on the services, initiatives, and infrastructure the community needs. An update on the long-term financial plan later this spring will help us better understand our financial position and the options available to make sure we're on a sustainable path. And with that, I'll turn it back to the Mayor.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Daniluk. Considering getting prepared for this meeting, it is workshop format, and so I'm going to be recommending that we do a 3-minute timer at the beginning, just so and unlimited numbers of opportunities to speak over the course of the night, but that we just to keep it flowing so people can ask their questions and we can move around the table and give lots of opportunity for council to respond. So the first speaker I see is Councillor Murray. Councillor Murray, your comments.
I just wanted to just ask Rick if he could just clarify on the process in regards to our social service providers. I missed part of that. Under the changes slide, you had talked about how there were going to be some decisions later in the year and a one-time increase, but that included childcare grants. So Family Services has come forward, and I brought up the issue of looking at, looking at an increase for our social service providers, given the pandemic and the impact to them through the pandemic and the numbers they're dealing with. So could you just elaborate on that?
Mr. Daniluk?
Yes, I can. That is through your worship, the increase to the community service grants is a 10% increase through the community service grants provided through that Community Services Advisory Committee, as well as a 10% increase to the community childcare grants provided through that committee.
So
There
that's
was an addition.
a 10
Sorry.
and 10.
Yes, and so there was a combined 37,000 for that. And then there was an additional $20,000 secured through the Vancouver Coastal Health. The community planning department reached out to us and we were able to secure that additional funding. And that funding is intended for seniors and youth. And it will also be released later this year.
And then what are we going to, and that's what you were talking about later in the year?
No, there will also be reports out later in the year where staff will have better information on the social service needs for the community, and will be reporting out on ongoing funding levels. They won't have all of the information at that point, but they will have an update to share.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was thinking 37,000. I was thinking more than that. But I know that information will provide additional ability for us to decide how we move forward. But I think we really have to take a look at that given the impact that they've had to incur. And I'm sure those numbers are not going to shrink given the situation of the world today.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. I have about 5 minutes of remarks. Would it be appropriate just to provide those remarks?
Yeah, we're hoping they're not questions.
No, I just have about 5 minutes of comments.
So what I would encourage, because we're going to come back to a regular meeting of council for the actual decision. So if it's just comments on the budget, you may be better off to save that for April 4th when we actually have it on the floor of the public meeting. If for the workshop purposes, probably the best thing to do would be ask any questions you may have about the process. But I mean, you're welcome to decide what you want to talk about, but I think it sounds like if you have a prepared statement on the matter, I'd probably suggest doing it when the matter comes before the regular meeting of council is probably the time for.
Well, that'll save time at the regular meeting, and so I'll leave it at that, except to thank Rick and all the other staff for the painstaking work, which was obviously shown in the preparation of this document. I echo Councillor Murray's comment that I would like to see a larger increase to the social services grants than $37,000 for reasons that have been discussed around this table in terms of the value that we get from those. And I will just make the very simple comment that in broad strokes, I agree with the methodology. I agree with the management of the budget. I do believe the budget aligns with the council priorities, and I would just say this, that I think if there was an area where we could improve, and I don't mean this as any kind of a criticism, but I think we probably should keep working at trying to simplify the process of setting out this budget in a transparent way. Notwithstanding the fact I've been at this 8 years, this is my 8th time that I've sat at this particular event, gone through it and put a significant amount of effort into comprehending it. It's still challenging, and when I think of the members of the public that have to quickly grasp where we stand, I think we could, and I don't mean this as a criticism, I just think we could continue to try and do better in setting it out in a really straightforward and clear way in terms of the variables in the budget. And I'll also just say that it's been very hard under COVID, I think, to really get a read of the public and to get public input. And again, without any criticism being intended, I think we could do a better job of gauging the will of the public on some of these critical issues, getting public input. And I think that will become increasingly important as we have to make potentially some very difficult decisions around the budget with and the inflationary cycle that we're in, and the potential that we are going to have to make some tough decisions. And if we're having to make those tough decisions, we want to make sure that the public is party to them. And with that, I'll save my further comments. But thank you very much, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Next speaker I have is Councillor Bond.
Thanks, Mayor. I know we've discussed this a little bit in the past, and it kind of comes up during each budget cycle, but I remember in the past talking about all the different plans, whether it's the transportation plan or the open space strategic plan, the various plans that either flowed out of the OCP and then inform staff's decisions when we're making, we're adding projects or programs or services to the budget. And I remember a number of those plans at that time still had very large unfunded portions of the plan. I was thinking about the open space and strategic plan, where there was a significant list of priorities and potential projects, but where many of them were unfunded. And I'm wondering, it's kind of maybe following up on Councillor Hansen's comment about getting a better idea of how far along in these plans are we from a financial perspective. How many of these different programs and projects or capital improvements have been delivered, and how many are left? It's kind of a bit of, I think it's an integration between the different departments. Obviously, it all flows through you, Rick. Everyone has to get paid and get the money to get a project and get approved. And there's a significant amount of due diligence and process internally behind which projects get funded and which don't. But I think some type of measurement, and I think Mr. Stewart, we've talked about this before, some type of metrics in measuring the progress that we're making towards our plans, not just from checking boxes and what's been done, but a financial progress, so we get a bit of a understanding of the big picture. So that's a bit of a comment. Mr. Stewart, you might have something about that. The other question I had is, I noticed that we moved forward the EV public charging infrastructure, and that was originally in the 5-year financial plan at the later end. I'm wondering if there's been any work or scope done towards what the details of that infrastructure might be, or if that's something that's we've pushed it into this budget cycle, and staff will begin work on it and come back to council for more discussion and interpretation of that.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, did you have a response first?
Yeah, just two quick comments. Rick has been working very, very diligently for the last 2 years on a long-term financial plan, which does exactly what you're talking about, and that's what we hope to give council a preview in May. Because quite frankly, a lot of this big stuff, you have to take a long-term view, not a short-term view. And we have this rolling 5 years, and Rick is trying to work on 10 years and 20 years. And so I think council will be actually quite intrigued by the information we're going to be able to provide as to what the outlook is, at least for the next 10 years, and the progress we can make and how we can measure that. So I think you will be pleased, Councillor Bond. Rick's done a lot of great work on this, and he's worked very hard in the middle of doing a normal budget process as well. So we're just in the process of confirming some of the assumptions, but we hope to be able to present something in May. And with respect to the EV, you're quite right. It was pushed out to further years, and we've managed to bring that forward. And so likely the environment working with planning will come forward in a report this spring to talk about exactly what we're going to be able to achieve and where we're going to be able to focus our efforts in that regard. But it is a significant move that we made, as you can tell with the numbers that are involved.
Yeah, that's great. On the point about the long-term financial plan, I think it's really important. Often, it's on when we're making kind of individual, discrete decisions. It's really important to have the big picture of how those decisions, especially financial decisions or project decisions, relate to the long-term plans that council and the community has for the community. So I think, especially now that we're having these transformational shifts that need to happen, and we have certain outcomes and targets that we're trying to reach. I'm thinking around climate, around transportation and mode shift. Being able to work backwards in time and align our financial resources with where our goals and ambitions are for the community is I think really important to make sure that we do achieve those important outcomes that we have determined are a priority for the community. So other than that, I didn't have any other specific questions. So thanks again, Rick and your team. I know it's a long process, and it's an iterative process, and it's always happening. We're always budgeting, and we're always planning for the financial health and well-being of the district. So thank you.
Councillor Bond. Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you very much, Rick, and your team. Again, we've come to expect really solid financial plans, and you've come through again. It's really an excellent, extensive document that includes a lot of detail. So thank you very much for your work. I just had a question around transportation. We've had a number of different groups and residents come forward looking for traffic calming measures. Things like new crosswalks. And I know that we approved a slow streets initiative. Just wondering if any increases there's been in that area of the budget.
Through
your worship, there continues to be an ongoing increase in the active transportation and safety measures in the local communities. Every year we apply a lift to that ongoing funding. The details of the projects, I'm sure, I believe Gavin's on the line. He might be able to speak better to the details around those projects that are included in the plan. But I can assure you that we continue to increase the ongoing funding every year in that priority area.
Mr. Joyce, are you on the line? There you go.
I am, Your Worship. Yeah, the DV right now has about $11 million of active transportation work that's ongoing for 2022 and 2023. Council has seen a lot of those urban trail projects, cycling links, safety, sidewalks, and urban trails. A real emphasis around sidewalks around schools. So there is a lot in this budget that plays on the active transportation file. And back to Councillor Bond's point, I was pleased to hear that. When staff produce these budgets and these reports, we take direction from these plans that we have, whether they're the Parks Master Plan or they're other plans, or the Pedestrian Master Plan. That's where we derive the projects. And they're based on the community input in the previous council and this council's decisions. And that's how we mock up and generate the budget.
No, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh,
that's my initial question. Yeah, I might have other things to touch on later on.
Okay, all right. We'll rotate through then. Councillor Murray, your comments.
Thank you. Well, just I can sort of piggyback off some of the comments that have been made. When are we going to be? What's the plan for us to sort of go through the census data? And the information that is coming forward this year in regards to sort of the current, population data and all the information that goes along with the census. And how are we going to look back, as some councillors have suggested, in regards to, where we've come from, where we are right now, and where we're going. And, I think we need to use that data to look at our OCP and to see if, in fact, the OCP produced what we were hoping it was going to produce, and whether or not that's actually happened. So in order to be able to plan for our budget and plan properly. So that's my one question. I'm not sure if Mr. Stewart's the one to answer that, or... You can stop my time. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Daniluk is ready.
Yeah, through your worship, we work very closely with the community planning department to make sure that we're looking back and projecting forward based on activity in the community and projects in progress. When it comes to the census and where that's going, Mr. Milburn would be better able to answer that question. I believe he's on the line.
So when my question is, when are we going to have that discussion?
Mr. Milburn?
The census data comes out in various tranches throughout the entire year. And then there's subsequent detailed reports that follow after that in 2023. So what we intend to do, of course, is
really hard to hear right now.
Let me see if I can speak up a little bit. Does that help, Your Worship?
Yes, it does, but there is.
You sound like you're in a tunnel.
if you're sitting close, it is clear enough for us to understand.
Okay, I'll do my best. Just to note that one of the first releases did come out, and we provided a summary to council. We'll continue to provide those summaries just so council has the basic background information. One of the key things we will be doing with that data is reviewing the housing needs report that we presented to council in the fall. So it was mentioned at that time, council really would like to prefer that information updated with the latest census information. So we will be updating that information and coming back to council. Additionally, as more details come out from the census in terms of age, population, sex, and all the various measures that are collected, that actually filters out into numerous areas of our organization in terms of tracking how the community is changing and shaping over time. It's just one source of information. There is also data that comes from the Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation and various other sources, including BC Statistics. So we will provide regular updates to council when that information is released, as well as integrating it into our various plans when we do bring those forward, such as the housing needs report.
Yeah, I'm looking for something a little bit more interactive with council and the community in regards to that census data, and as well as looking at our OCP and continually sort of looking back and reviewing our OCP to make sure that we're addressing what we planned for when we created the document. Councillor, so I'll be interested in looking at some sort of a workshop in that regard, Mayor Little. Maybe I can talk to you about it because I think it would be really informative for the community and council. I think
Can I just interject on that, Councillor Mary? So I agree. The only thing is, I think what Mr. Milburn was saying is that because the census data comes out in various tranches, and so the data we have so far from the February 9th release particularly is just a really limited portion. It gives you your general population statistics.
Yeah,
so we're gonna have to wait probably.
Oh yeah, no. I understand that all of it's being, it's incremental. It's too bad. You have so long to fill it out and then they take forever to release all the information. So I get that it's an incremental release, but when it's all released, I think it's really important for us to take that data and look back. Just switching gears for a minute, I think Councillor Back asked a question in regards to, many of the requests that come in regards to safety, road safety, and that kind of thing. We've got a lot of requests, and Mr. Joyce answered that we had 11 million in active transportation. Is that right, Mr. Joyce?
That's correct, Your Worship. Again, this is the budget. Should council want specifics, there's 8 million for sidewalks in the capital plan. Pemberton sidewalk, Pemberton Avenue between 20th and Keith Road. These are all items that are all within the budget. We could certainly provide them around the new sidewalk projects or the active transportation plan in more detail.
So I just am looking at page 5 under the enhanced livability and mobility. And, I'm going to use Deep Cove as an example. I know that there's been applications from neighborhoods in Deep Cove for resident parking only because the issue of traffic circulation in the Cove continues to be a challenge that has not been addressed by engineering. There's been 2 applications that I know about by neighborhoods who have been told by engineering that there's a 2-year waiting list for resident parking only, and that the engineering department is looking at hiring a contractor to deal with the backlog of resident parking only in these neighborhoods. So I really need to understand how we're going to address that moving forward. If we talk about the infrastructure and the grants that we're looking at for the Cove, for Livable Deep Cove, I have a challenge with that title. But there's so many other things that need to be addressed before new things are implemented. And it's one of my challenges as we continue to move forward with the amount of spending that we're doing in our budget. Capital maintenance is lower than new capital that we're implementing within the municipality. I'm thinking of Kate's Park right now. We waited for a grant, we didn't get it. And Kate's Park has been there's been no improvements to Kate's Park for decades. But we are, improving, new parks within new town centers. And so those are the real things that I've always been interested in. I continue to be interested in. And I need to understand how we look after our existing infrastructure first. There has to be a balance. I get it. The town centers require infrastructure in order to support them, and I understand that. But there also has to be really a review back to the infrastructure that continues to get deferred year after year. At the beginning of this council term, we talked about our Seymour Trails study, and I see that we're still planning for it. We're in the almost at the end of our term, and I haven't heard anything about it. Blue Ridge Park needs a lot of work. There's debris everywhere through the trails. And it sits in a residential neighborhood, and it needs we need to attend to it. So I understand the balance of town centers, but we need to put some money into our existing communities. And I just don't see that there's sort of enough of an even balance with that right now. So those are my initial comments.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. First time speaker, Councillor Kern.
Thank you. Sorry, my laptop died and I was booted away there for a minute. Well, thank you to staff for pulling this together. As I read through the document, I felt like there's a lot that has changed a lot since I was first on council. I'm really pleased about that. But I do have some questions. On page 48, there's an upgrades of water main, sanitary, and sewer in town centers for 5 million. And I just, that kind of ties into another question that I have of green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. And maybe it's more of something in the future. It would be good to see like where our spending is on green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. There's lots of evidence to support affordability over time, and also a lot of co-benefits to doing things in a new old way, a new way of doing it, but using nature, especially to adapt and mitigate climate change impacts. So I don't know if staff could comment specifically on what is at all the town centers, these upgrades, and are we looking at green infrastructure over gray infrastructure for those? And then any comments on general breakdown of green versus gray moving forward? Question 1, Rick.
Mr. Donnelly.
Through your worship, that amount that's on page 48 is all the centers. It's a consolidated view of those investments. And
I could add some more, Rick, if you'd like.
yes, thanks, Gavin.
Through your worship, with the MOTI improvements that were done around the bridgehead, we took advantage of the work that was done there with the Sealand Town Center. This is work that the district would have to undertake at some point in time through our asset management plans. So that is a payment to Modi that we would make, but all that work has been done by Modi's contractor that the district now no longer has to do. So there was drainage works, some sanitary works, and actually I believe some water main work as well. So it's just an opportunity to take advantage of work that we would have to do, but we could piggyback on a contract that made financial sense for the district.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kern.
Any comment about the green versus gray infrastructure?
Yes, Your Worship, we continue to push that envelope and be happy to bring a little bit of information report back on that topic. There's some interesting things going on, especially in our paving group and our sanitary group, but that's almost a topic in itself, Councillor Curran.
No, that's fine.
I can provide an informational report on that. I would like to do that.
I looked at the work around Kilmore Creek with the ecological accounting process, and I think a lot of that sort of new way of looking at things. And then in the financial plan, Mr. Stewart must be on this call somewhere talking about carbon accounting and natural asset work that's underway. So I'm very pleased to see some of that work, but I do think it would be good so that we can see the long-term benefits of these investments in showing that if we do something in a new way, that it's actually more affordable and has all these co-benefits. I think moving forward, that would be a good way to look at things, in the same way that we're looking at mitigation versus adaptation. And I just had a, I know there's been different ways of accounting for that spending over the years, but now we're breaking it down into mitigation and adaptation, which I think is really important. And I just wondered if staff had any thoughts or ideas around the percentage of what municipalities are spending in terms of mitigation versus adaptation. Ours is very, very heavy on the adaptation, which is necessary. Of course, it's not an either or, and if we don't know, that's okay. But I think over time, that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to look at, what percentage we're spending to reduce the impacts, and what we're spending to, reduce the impacts in a different way. Is any comments on that?
Your worship, actually, I noticed Carolyn Jackson's on the call. It would be good to bring her in as part of this, and maybe talk a little bit about the ISMP and some of the other comments that have been made by Councillor Kern here.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Joyce. Just through worship to Councillor Kern, I was just going to mention that I think it's important to recognize when we look at that breakdown that there is quite a bit of climate action work that's embedded within some of these other line items. So for example, the infrastructure reserve, the fleet and equipment reserve, parks and open spaces, even the affordable housing work to some extent in terms of its impact on reduced commute times and the like. So I think that's something that we could definitely take a look at in terms of that split and provide more information to council. But I just wanted to mention that there is, we're really trying, I think, as a municipality to really embed climate action, whether it be adaptation or mitigation within our existing projects wherever possible. So it's possible that there's a little bit of subtleties there. And then, yeah, just to Mr. Joyce's point regarding the integrated stormwater management plan, there will be further details in that plan when we bring it forward around green infrastructure and our aspirations with regard to that.
Thank you. That's a helpful framing, that it's embedded, so it won't always show up so clearly. And then just another question, and I guess we'll go through another round of questions, but the resilience framework, I know that the director isn't here, but that's something I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about. I think that's something that's been identified in our climate group as wondering what was happening in that. Is anyone able to speak to that resilience framework?
I could speak to that briefly. I see Mr. Stewart has his hand up. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Carolyn, then I'll comment. I'd just like to comment on the different ways that infrastructure is financed and where the funds come from. And sometimes, as much as we're trying to green things, if you need a big 24-inch sanitary sewer pipe, there's not too many ways to make that green other than make sure we haven't got water coming into it so we can size it properly. But I'll turn over to Carolyn to talk about the resiliency framework.
Yeah, and the question would best be directed obviously to Ms. Dickin, but I certainly have been in contact with her regarding that work, and certainly also quite excited about the possibility for a strategy across the North Shore that really looks at strengthening the resilience of our communities, and not just in a sort of infrastructure or hard infrastructure way, but also in terms of our social resiliency. And I know that's something that will be a key focus of that work.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Kern, floor is back to you, I believe. Did you finish your comments?
Well, I thought we could go through another. I used my 3 minutes, so yeah.
Sure. Great, let's do that. So I'm just going to make my first comments on the matter. I guess on the social service increase that's mentioned in the newest report here, I think you're hearing from council that there's a willingness to make a stronger commitment to supporting social services through grants in our community. And I think we all found the $37,000 to be modest, although I also recognize that within a 5-year planning cycle for finance, there's opportunity to make change. We don't have to just necessarily do it entirely through the budgeting process. But the way it's framed in the report, it seems to suggest that it is a a temporary one-time 10% increase, and that's not our typical budget planning process. And so I guess, is the increase now going to be the cut of next year if we follow through with this way, or is there an understanding from staff that this is representing a bit of a shift on council in terms of our attitude towards, or at least a stronger commitment from our council for the granting process in the community? Mr. Stewart?
Your worship, no, we recognize that council wants to move in that direction. We've done some very initial sort of contacts with some of the groups, and I think that's where the initial amount came from, but we're going to continue to do some work and report back to council later in the year. We do have the opportunity to adjust budgets, but we also have processes under which we review grants and review relationships. And so this was an initial cut really to talk about what we heard about what the impacts of COVID were at this particular point in time. But we recognize as we continue to have that dialogue, we'll be coming back with more information. And I wouldn't see a downward adjustment in that. In fact, we might end up with an increase, but that's going to be the subject of further discussions.
Yeah, I just want to put out there also that some of the charitable organizations in our community, some of the best way to help them is obviously cash is always appreciated, but some of them, they do have some planning challenges going forward where they don't have secured space. North Shore Family Services has been asking for us to sit down with them over long-term space for their facility, and what's going to happen with the Hope Center next to Maplewood Farm, and so maybe the best ways we can help them is to give them a better picture of what their long-term future is on some of those spaces. When active transportation, I know as we go through the budget, it's something I've certainly talked about a lot over the last while, and that I wanted to see a significant commitment towards active transportation in our community. But I also recognize that many of the projects in our community that are in the budget serve multiple purposes. So is the Allen intersection an active transportation project? Well, obviously it's meant to help with vehicle traffic, but it's also improved pedestrian crossing, improved bus access leading up to it, bike lanes through it. And so how do you slice and dice it to say that this portion of it is an active transportation project? So I do recognize that staff are doing what they can to make sure our priorities are reflected in this area, and this council has made a commitment towards improving cycling, bus, and pedestrian infrastructure throughout our community. I think that is reflected largely in the plan. I noted in the plan there was a comment about inflation, and the expectation at the time the report was written was that inflation is going to go up slightly. It's largely going to correct itself, and by the end of the year, we're good. We're probably back to the historical trend of low inflation. And I gotta say, I don't see that happening in the short run. I mean, when you contemplate things like the big quit in the United States, geopolitical instabilities that are going on, not just supply chain matters that theoretically will resolve themselves over time, but there's a lot of stuff that has changed from when we had the historically low inflation rates over the last 15 years. And so I'm just wondering how we come to the conclusion that we're going to return to historically low inflation rates. Mr. Daniluk, a totally impossible question to probably answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, we try to keep pace with current events and trends and all the forecasts that are going on. And at the time of writing the report, those were the summary positions that inflation would likely return to normal levels over the next 2 years. And obviously things have changed somewhat in the last little while. And so the best we can do is continue to monitor. We know we're concluding 2021 in a surplus position, and we're using some of those funds to stabilize impacts this year. And we're always looking at ongoing adjustments to contain costs where we can. So we'll just have to continue to monitor and assess impacts. And I'd say that the areas where the most impacts are being felt are in the capital plan, and that's why we're saying we'll probably come back in the spring with an amendment for those projects.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a much longer term trend on inflation, particularly as in construction. And so, you know, the municipality doesn't have a standard basket of goods that you would calculate in CPI like a regular resident might have. There's really a municipal basket of goods that is affected. Lumber is not at the level it was last year, but it's still high. Steel, labor rates, all of the things that we have in our basket of goods in droves are all on a very steep inflationary trend. And so I guess I'm just trying to be cautious about us saying that we think, it's going to return back to normal, when I think that the municipal basket of goods is on its way up still. And just as an example, I'll give is the we have 3 flagpoles out front. And I went to staff to ask about getting a 4th flagpole so that we could have a guest flagpole for whenever we host for multiple sclerosis or for recognizing Pride Month or different things. And the quote came back for over $13,000 for 1 flagpole to be installed. That's the environment we're in for construction. Nobody wants the small jobs. And so they're pricing up the small jobs to the point that they're obscene. and so I'm very cautious about us going out in the community and saying we think that this is actually going to flatten out. I think that it's probably better to say it is in a state of flux and it's dynamic and hard to predict. But Mr. Stewart, maybe you have more insight on the matter.
You've nailed it on the head. And I mean, this isn't new. I mean, this construction cost escalation started a while ago, and it's got worse as not only do we have a product, as you've mentioned, that is increasing, but labor with COVID has been very, very difficult. We have 40 vacancies in the district right now, which is unprecedented. I was on the LGMA website this morning, and they used to average around 20 to 30 vacancies in the province that they would average. They're at 550 right now. And so I think what's going to mitigate a lot of this, because I agree with you, I don't necessarily see inflation reducing significantly. I think it's going to go up for a while, and it'll be that way for a while. Certainly the geopolitical unrest with and the impact on food and oil, et cetera, is going to drive some of those costs. So we're going to do what we always do, which is manage projects. And what we found in the last number of years is what we've had to do is say, okay, we can't do all the projects that we want to do. And that in some cases results in what we call a capital tail, which means that we have a bunch of projects that we couldn't get done, which are carried forward into the next year. And so that's the kind of thing that we're going to have to try to manage. You know, when I look at some of the big projects that are happening in the region, I'm worried about what the real cost impact is going to be to the region of some of these mega infrastructure projects as they continue to escalate. But we are monitoring it, and we will manage it. We've managed it for decades, and council can be sure we've got the talent to do that. But there's no question we're in, certainly compared to the decade that we had of low interest rates and some relative stability, we're in a time of uncertainty, no question about that.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Councillor Murray.
Well, I was going to leave the big concerns for the end, Mr. Stewart, but now that you've brought it up, Metro is a big concern, and the projects that are being planned and considered right now, you know, that accommodate the growth that is coming to the region are significant. And you know, it's our little neck of the woods, our own individual balance sheets for our homes and our families. Then it's our municipalities, then the region, then the province, then the country. And we're in a state of flux in, you know, in all those places and you know, the world. You know, couple that with the impacts of climate change, and every single year something happens and it's worse than the year before. You know, they just announced yesterday and today on the news in regards to the town of Lytton. A year later, they've received $18 million, which is just going to clean up and remove the debris from that fire. You know, I mean, they've, you know, how do we as a municipality deal with anything like that? I mean, you know, it's overwhelming just to even think about a scenario such as that here. And how we would rebuild. The amount of water that Mr. Joyce continues to deal with in our municipality, certainly amount of snow, and what happens when the freshet comes this year. You know, one of our biggest snowpacks, what is that going to do when the temperature begins to warm? And how do we deal with all of that? I mean, for the last 10 years, just over 10 years, we have been moving forward on, you know, change and, you know, developing more, building more, planning more. And yes, those costs have been going up and we've been watching them. But now it seems that we're in a place that, you know, none of us have a crystal ball. You know, none of the economists really know. They can guess. They don't really know. Rick, you don't know. Dave doesn't know. None of us know what's going to happen. We have such uncertainty in the world right now. And I really think that if, you know, within all of those, and the phrase living within our means comes up more often than not at the Metro Board. And we are looking at massive projects, billions of dollars in infrastructure, new infrastructure and capital for projects to support growth. And there is a very significant concern at the board in regards to that amount of spending. And I know Mr. Stewart's colleagues around the region also share those concerns. And where is the funding coming from for those projects? What kind of commitment do we have from senior levels of government? You know, what is the state of the federal government's finances? They're dealing with a lot of stuff. They've bought some stuff that isn't as they thought. And there's some issues that were not around a few years ago, like a war and the amount of climate change impact that we've had. So as a counselor for the community, I need to understand that we are living within our means and that we are going to be able to address the unknown when it happens. And I don't know that. I don't know that we can handle some big catastrophic event in our community. So far, we've been able to manage through some stuff. But what about those big events? So, you know, all of this discussion about this, about the budget, Mayor Little, always raises all of these other philosophical discussions. We don't generally ever get to have a discussion about the what ifs. And it always comes up at the budget every year. We start talking about these things. So, you know, those are some of the questions I have. I mean, I can, you know, wait and go around again and talk about what affordable housing means, you know, growth management, you know, and the fact that there's a whole bunch of stuff keeps being pushed further and further out into years that never really gets dealt with, and how we manage that against, you know, new capital improvements in our community. But, you know, really, I think we have to look at the big picture, and I think we really have to have a discussion about this so we can have that certainty. We can be able to assure our residents that we are ready.
Yeah, obviously hard to provide that assurance when, as you say, there's so many variables along the way. Mr. Stewart, did you have a comment?
Yeah, we started about 10 years ago to start to top up the reserves. The council will remember, or maybe some of you weren't here. We actually went through all of our utilities and identified where we thought we would be in a number of years and where we needed to top up reserves. Now, does that handle a catastrophe? No, but we do have very healthy reserves, and we have increased, particularly in this term, the capital contribution towards things like climate change and alternate methods of transportation and housing. So we are incrementally trying to deal with that. The wildfire expenditures that we've made are a really good example of us trying to be very proactive to try to deal with this. The drainage stuff that engineering has done. So we are trying to position ourselves as best as we can. But I mean, if I can't begin to say how we would deal with a Lytton if it was North Vancouver. That's just the reality. I can say that we've really reduced our risk in terms of flooding quite significantly, and we'll continue to do that. But you know, we've been able to run a surplus and put money in the reserves in the last 10, 15 years. We're in pretty good financial shape. Rick can confirm that, I think. And we're spending more money where we think we need to spend to try to reduce that risk. And I think that's the only promise that I can make, other than the fact that we've been, you know, successful in managing our emergencies best as we can, and we'll continue to plan, work together as a group on the North Shore. But I'm not going to sugarcoat the concerns we've got about regional spending and the impact it's going to have on local government and local residents. That's something that unfortunately, to be quite frank, at the local level, when I say the local level, at the local staff level, we have very little control of that. Those are big political exercises, and it's going to be up to the politicians in the region, both whether it's TransLink or whether it's Metro stuff, to be able to ensure that the funding is there, and in particular, the contributions from the senior levels of government. I mean, we have gone on record as the regional administrators to say, you know, some of these projects should not progress until we've got some kind of commitments from senior levels of government that money's going to be there. Otherwise, we're just going to bankrupt ourselves. So we've been very clear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a question specifically from the budget about affordable housing. And I was gratified that in the budget plan over the next 5 years to 2026, there was an allocation of 74.4 million towards social and affordable housing if the land dedication is included. And I know this is halfway towards the referenda goal. The 2018 referenda that did pass had the goal of 1,000 units. We were going to spend $150 million for 1,000 units by 2029. So by spending 75 million by 2026, we're spending approximately half of that, and in approximately half of the time. The question that I would ask, though, and this is relevant to the whole concept of inflation and what it's costing us to create these units, do we have a calculation of how many units we will have created for that, call it 75 million? Will we have created 500 units? Will we be halfway to our goal?
Your Worship, perhaps Dan could talk about the rate as compared to the projections. But I'll just have to be very honest, Council. We're ready to do a lot more in terms of social and affordable housing. As a municipality, Council has sent us down that particular path. You know, we had an item on the agenda, which is going to be put on the next agenda in terms of 2 specific sites. But I have to be very honest. The provincial and federal governments are quite behind the mark in terms of what they promised and what they've actually delivered. And we're finding that the delays in getting projects where we've now pre-zoned and we've got council approval and community support, and we're just wanting to get ahead, these things drag on for years when they shouldn't. That's the big frustration in meeting, you know, Councillor Hanson's comments is we're ready, we're committed. We've identified places to do this, what we can do. You know, we've gone as far as got, in some cases, designs and partners and goodness knows else what, rezonings, and it's still such a very sluggardly process. And maybe Dan, you can comment on that, your experience.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe my microphone should be coming in better.
I can hear you clearly.
Good. I changed microphone, so I hope that improves things. So Mr. Danielek has been keeping track with his team and our team about the budget estimates and the amount of units. We typically look at between 2 to 3 significant projects per year is what we try to aim for. All of that, of course, depends on funding allocation from other levels of government, as well as working with nonprofit housing providers. So we've been quite successful in the recent past on achieving that rate. So we're hopeful that we can continue to do that, provided, as Mr. Stewart says, the others can come to the table. In terms of progress towards the housing continuum and the various targets, we will be having the pace of development report coming out for the last year, which looks at progress and compares that to the housing continuum or the estimated demand for those various forms of housing. So that information will be coming out, so quite a bit of detail. But Mr. Danielek may be able to comment on the high-level figure that was derived to come up with that estimate of the approximately 70 some odd $million. Again, as Mr. Stewart mentions, this is all subject to council direction through rezoning processes, and of course we can increase allocations with partnerships. And Mr. Danielek.
Mr. Danielek?
Yes, through your worship, the number of units that are included in the provision is approximately 600. That includes 120 care beds, and it's a combination of partnerships leveraging district-owned land and waiving fees, as well as amenity contributions, just based on past experience and looking forward. So we think it's a reasonable provision, but as Dan mentioned, requires a partner to make it happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, yeah, I had one other comment I was going to make about active transportation is, again, we are getting a lot of commitments from the federal and provincial government that they want to support these kinds of projects, and so we just, it requires a commitment of our resources, but I think we have the ability to multiply even the numbers that are already on the 5-year plan to be able to go out and pair them up with projects that TransLink, the province, and the federal government are supportive of. I know that in TransLink's budgeting process that they're going through right now in the 10-year vision contemplates both a significant expansion of bus service, but also all of the pieces that lead to the better bus service, which is going to be improvements and crossings around them, bump outs, potential partnering on pedestrian connections and cycling connections in different areas. It's become clear that TransLink is willing to partner financially on a number of those projects in order to make sure that active transportation is also being supported. So I think even the pieces that we're committing to in active transportation, we're going to still be able to farm out and partner with other levels of government to get to multiply that support for those objectives. Councillor Curran.
Yeah, I just wondered if staff could comment on, this is the first time that certainly the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples implementation is part of our, is mentioned in our financial plan, as well as the work we're doing around reconciliation. And I think Mr. Ma had inquired about that. And I'm just wondering where there's things like that, they don't necessarily show up in the way that something else would in the budget. But that there is, obviously there's resources and staff, and I just wanted to clarify that that was new based on council direction, that we have put more resources into implementation of that work. And I know that at the corporate level, there's a lot of work happening around updating the equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy and that sort of work. So if staff could just comment generally on that. I think the language was used as, put your money where your mouth is kind of thing. So just wondered if staff could comment on that.
I see Mr. Stewart.
Your worship, and I think council is aware that we've made a lot of progress on that particular file in just 1 year, but Councillor Curran is right. In many cases, those are embedded in operating budgets and you don't see the incremental allocation of one-time funds, for example, because you don't see that. But the fact of the matter is, when I just think of the Tsleil-Waututh, for example, and the number of agreements and discussions that we've had to move things forward, I mean, it's a real change in the way that we're dealing with one another, and we are working now on the North Shore to try to create a North Shore steering committee consisting of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the 3 North Shore municipalities. So I think you're going to see a lot of progress this year on that particular file. We've got a workshop with the Tsleil-Waututh on, I think it's Thursday, to talk about the whole referral process and what that entails. So I think, although you don't see it in the budget, we have allocated operating funds to be able to move this project forward, and allocated 1 staff member to sort of monitor it and shepherd it. So I think you're going to see a lot of progress. You're going to be quite happy with what we're able to do over the next year to 2 years.
Thank you for that update. And you did mention, and we got a report around this potential, like a task force. And would there be funding? Obviously, there would need to be funding, but do we feel comfortable that we would be able to support that with the other municipalities? Again, there's no line item because that's not the way these things show up, but would that work be included in the financial plan?
Yes, and we would just normally, throughout the year, as we either get direction from council or something comes up. In fact, it could be, for example, an opportunity for a grant. We try to seize all of those opportunities, and then what we do is we do a budget revision at the end of the year. So, but the kind of thing like a task force, from my perspective, is not big money in the scheme of things, and it's more of something that we can accommodate within our reserves and contingencies.
Thank you. And yeah, staff has been doing a great job, and it seems like there is a lot of positive movement in this. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murray.
Mr. Joyce, you reminded me, or actually, I guess Mr. Mayor Little reminded me in regards to improvements in regards to transportation, but I think I've asked half a dozen times over the years if we could look at a shelter, a bus shelter at Seymour Boulevard and Mount Seymour Parkway at the Superstore. It's there's people standing there in the pouring rain all the time with groceries. That's where they go. You know, we're talking about wanting people to get on the bus, and then they have to sit there in the pouring rain. It really needs a shelter. We've got one further down Riverside, but we really, really need to put one there. I think it's really important. There's a very large area. You know, the lessons of how it's situated on that bridge, I know we've learned from, and it's a challenging intersection when the bus stops there because it backs everybody up into the intersection. But I would really appreciate if we could finally get a bus shelter in there. And so, you know, it's a little bit more comfortable for people that are shopping and then riding on the bus. There's particularly quite a number of seniors that sit at that shelter in the rain. Are you saying yes?
I will follow that with that, Your Worship. I'm positive that's Modi area, but I will follow up and we'll make sure we can get that to translate.
We just need to put one in. I don't care who it is. We just need to put one in for people.
I can assure you, Councillor Murray, that when we had our sub-regional meetings with TransLink, that was one of the priorities I put forward. Was I believe that TransLink underestimates the impact of security, safety, and comfort within the system, and how that's keeping some people away from using the transit services. In some of the proposals from TransLink, they wanted to extend the evening hours, and I put the question to them: Have you experienced what it's like in some of our spaces? We need lighting, we need some weather protection, and frankly, it's not a comfortable place to be. We all pay into the TransLink police force, yet the TransLink police force is almost never on the North Shore, and if it is on the North Shore, it's only ever at Lonsdale Quay, so it's not in the district of North Vancouver. They have a separate security service that also responds, but it's almost entirely to the benefit of south of the inlet, and so I have been raising those issues, and I hope to get a response back on some of the shelter requests because I think it's critically important to get people to see it as a viable alternative to getting into a private vehicle.
Don't go anywhere, Mr. Joyce. I have another question.
Yeah, I just was going to mention, yeah, Gavin can tell you this. As a CAO, you know, he's constantly under pressure to add infrastructure that's the responsibility of somebody else. And so we've also got to be very careful about letting them abdicate their responsibility for putting in proper infrastructure and ending up in a situation where we're paying for it on the North Shore and nobody else is around the region. And that's
this is the problem with,
argument.
You know, this is why, you know, Mr. Wardell's work and Mr. Daniluk's work and Mr. Iorio's work in regards to taxation reform is so critical. And I know it's within the budget, and we continue to talk about it and continue to lobby. You know, I like the old days when senior levels of government would just give us money because they just needed to give us money because that's how it worked, instead of we'll give you a grant for a project so we can look good. You know, on our timeline when we want it, not when you want it and not when it works for you, but when it works for us. And it's a screwy process. It doesn't make sense, and it's frustrating. And infrastructure like a frickin' shelter for a bus stop is just, it's so ridiculous. I hope Mr. Joyce just do it because it's the right thing to do. And if they don't want to do it, well, then we will, and they can wear it. My other question, Mr. Joyce, would be, you know, this ongoing issue in the Cove in regards to traffic circulation, you know, the work that we're going to discuss in regards to Lower Gallant, this connector, and my ongoing frustration in regards to never hearing anything in regards to the circulation north of the Parkway. We all talk about wanting to be more environmental. We all talk about how we want to look at other forms of transportation to, you know, have people travel, but then we allow this circuitous lineup of cars driving around and around and around and around and around the Cove, impacting the livability of the residential neighborhoods. And we're not solving the problem. You know, the suggestion that we add this lower plaza because a grant was available for COVID is, to me, just another attraction that is going to bring even more people down to the Cove and create even more gridlock. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I need to understand that plan. You know, the vast majority of people in the Cove are very accepting of those visitors that want to come and spend time down there. They've always shared. But I've never seen so many neighborhoods want to talk about resident-only parking. And I've never gotten so many calls in regards to traffic in the Cove that I've had in the last, at least this last term and before that. It's untenable. And we need to put a plan together to deal with it instead of, you know, oh, well, these little sort of incremental solutions, which in my mind aren't solutions. Like the Naughton Connector is not a solution to traffic in Deep Cove. It's just moving it somewhere else. So I need to understand sooner, because I think it will impact the future of that project, certainly from my perspective, and whether I raise my hand in favor or against. Because I need to understand how we're going to be impacting and dealing with this traffic issue.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, you know, I get that, you know, the budgeting process becomes the catch-all for you know, projects that are occurring in the community or not occurring in the community. But, you know, I really want to keep us focused on the budget document that's in front of us here tonight. Mr. Joyce, your comments?
I appreciate that, Your Worship, that comment. And so to answer Councillor Murray, though, we have a full 2-hour workshop coming up in the next 2 weeks. We're going to try not move Naughton Detour into that as Council requested. And then follow up later on the Safe Streets, Councillor Back, that you asked about. We'll move that back, but we'll also deal with Livable Deep Cove, as it is called, and because of the grant issue. But we recognize, Councillor, we went back and we listened to the tape, all the council's comments. As we started talking about the construction project, all those issues, parking, quarry rock, all were discussed in their entirety. So we're going to make an attempt at that, but I'd like council to keep in mind that we are dealing with that block area and a grant at this point, but we recognize we need to give council some peace of mind on how we're going to handle those other issues in the code going forward. And if I could, Your Worship, just mention, it's not like, gang, we haven't done anything to this. I spent like a year with the SFU School of Communication, exhaustive time with all sorts of residents, businesses, merchants to come up with a plan for 3-hour parking and the changes, and then go to pay parking somewhere down the line. The Cove, you know, for most of the time is a pretty good place. There's 3 to 4 months of the year that it really, really struggles. And like a lot of areas in the Lower Mainland, it's way overused. And that's what the issue we're dealing with. And that isn't the 3-hour parking anymore. And so to your point, Councillor Murray, do we take that next step and we start to lock it down a particular area in residents because we value that more over than the people coming into the Cove? And that's a question for council to move on the next step, quite frankly. But we're prepared to talk about that 2 weeks.
Okay, look forward to that. But I hope that the vast majority of that conversation is about that area, because we will have to make some decisions about it. It is a big budget item, Mayor Little. It is part of this budget discussion because it's about transportation. And, you know, it's again, you know, not looking, I mean, Mr. Joyce, just when you refer to Deep Cove and you talk about the 3-hour parking, et cetera, that's just the Cove commercial area. I'm talking about the entire area north of the Parkway. And that's where there's always a disconnect. And that's why you know, we haven't done anything about it. Because it always gets separated out.
Yeah, and that's now moved out as it typically does in those areas. Again, it goes back to the usage. In my hometown in Delta right now, same thing. But that, you know, that's going to be where council will draw that line on where we want to put those parking areas. So we can't create any more parking. We have what we have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joyce. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Back, your comments?
Thank you, Mayor Little. Just wondering if we can switch gears for a second and talk about childcare. And I'm wondering if staff can comment on, first of all, when we might receive another update, because it's been a while, on our childcare action plan. And then just on some of the investments in childcare that are in this 5-year plan. I know that the Eldon Park project is featured here, which I think is a wonderful project. And I hope that we look to do more similar types of projects like that, where we're combining childcare with another use. But yeah, just looking for kind of a general comment for staff on childcare as it relates to the financial plan and when we might get an update.
Thank you. Mr. Milburn?
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff have tried to provide an annual update typically, and so we will look to provide one before the summer break. And this would be in the form of an information report update to how we're progressing in terms of meeting our targets for care spaces. And so we anticipate, as I say, having that before council breaks for the summer in terms of an information report. And Mr. Danielek may be able to comment in terms of how that's reflected in the budget. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Mr. Danielek? You're muted, sir.
Thank you. Yes, just briefly, the financial plan does include 2 provisions for childcare, as you can see in the back of the book there, in the 5-year capital details, one for Eldon and one for Sealand Park. We continue to work on the longer term as well, and look for opportunities to move viable projects forward. And recently, with a bit of a focus on use of district parks for childcare, which is the case with Eldon. So we have a rolling 10-year plan, and we try to keep that plan current. And as better information on projects comes forward and financial strategies are applied, some of those projects in the outer years are brought forward to the 5-year financial plan bylaw.
That's great. Thank you for the update. And I just think as some of our town centers start to become a place where we're welcoming new residents, we're seeing a lot more young families. I think childcare is just going to continue to be, you know, a big issue. So, yeah, looking for more types of creative solutions like the Eldon one that we can be incorporating into our plans. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brack. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the things that I think confuses the public from time to time is the fact that they get a tax bill with respect to their residence, and only a portion of that is with respect to district taxes, and yet they sometimes don't, in their minds, clearly differentiate those different allocations. And going through the plan, I was able to deduce that the average district tax bill for a residence is $2,400, and the average metro levy is $1,800. I believe that's correct. There's also a school tax in addition. I wonder if you could provide that for us, the average school tax. So that makes up the pie chart of the bill that our residents actually pay on an annual basis. And then I guess looking ahead, we're being very conscientious, and we're trying to keep our tax increases to 3%, 2% for operating, 1% for infrastructure. But when we look at the metro levy, which is due to increase in the teens on a 5-year basis, I wonder if you could talk about how that flow chart or that pie chart is likely to look at the end of our 2026 financial plan, because it seems to me it's likely that the metro levy will actually be the largest single proportion of the bill that our residents pay that they consider to be their tax bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Danlop.
Through your worship, I'm sorry, I actually don't have the pie chart details at my fingertips. I'm having some technology issues, but from memory, the school tax portion of the residential property tax bill is about just over 30%. That portion has, from what in reviewing it just earlier today, has remained somewhat steady over the last few years. So when you're looking at your municipal property tax bill, it's about 50%, 57% of your total taxes. And then other taxing jurisdictions make up about 43% of the remainder. So that's the first question. There is a bit of a wrinkle there when it comes to school taxes in that our businesses are being impacted by a different approach when it comes to the application of the provincial school tax to their assessments. And that's something that we're looking into through the efforts on municipal finance reform. On the other matter, which is the metro charges and how they flow through our utility rates, it's quite true that those charges are approaching the levels of our municipal property tax bill and will likely exceed them if they continue on the current trend. So another reason why we continue conversations on municipal finance reform and encouraging Metro to make sure that the growth in the region is paying for its impacts on services, and especially those regional services that they provide.
Thank you. Councillor Curran.
Thanks. Just a question. I remember the last time we were looking at the budget, the property insurance had gone up in double digits, and I noticed that it's 23% increase again. And is that something that we just expect? Is that accurate that it went up double digits again? And the cost of insurance, there's lots of concern around how the insurance industry will work especially as these billion-dollar events happen, multi-billion-dollar events related to climate change. Does staff have any comments on the insurance costs? Is that a trend that you see? I know you don't have a magic ball, but do you see them going up to that extent again? And was that year over year? Like I remember it standing out from last time being very significant.
Mr. Danlop.
Through your worship, yes, the insurance costs have increased substantially this year. I believe it's in double digits again, and there is some forecast from our supplies and risk management department that indicate that that trend might continue in the next couple of years. They work with other municipalities and the Municipal Insurance Association to get the best and most affordable package that we can get. But like other items in our municipal cost structure, we monitor those costs and make sure that we're getting good value for money.
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I'll just give council a couple of examples. I own a sailboat and a house, and my insurance goes up every year and my coverage reduces. One would think that that's not appropriate or fair, but that's the reality. And so I think you're going to see that trend is going to continue. When people start to balk at the increases, they're going to start to reduce the actual coverage. And that's just something that we're going to have to deal with, particularly if we continue to deal with insurance claims, dealing with massive climate change issues. Those are going to be global, worldwide. I know Andy's been having some discussions with some folks in Switzerland as to what we could do to try to mitigate that for municipal government by actually having a policy that would help us deal with emergencies in the interim period before the federal governments and the provincial government step in. So like Rick has said, we're monitoring it, but you're bang on. These are just other things that are adding to the costs and the pressures that our residents and businesses are facing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, there are towns more and more now, you know, a couple of years ago when we talked about properties being bought out, forced retreat, or managed retreat, we were kind of like, oh, and now that's actually happening more and more frequently. And so I think in the long term, it is, in short term, it's going to be important to think of like what happens when properties in the district are uninsurable, because that is happening in towns, especially if they have a fire, whether or not they can rebuild, to what standards they can rebuild. Lytton, one of the challenges Lytton has is what is insurable versus what they need to build to be a resilient town. There's a gap between that. So, I mean, it is just an ever-changing space, but I think it's great. I know that staff is working on that. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think it's just something to, yeah, we don't know, but it is a scary space for sure.
Yeah, so I did just want to add my comments on it. I see we're starting to draw to a close as far as councillors putting their hands up to speak, but I did just want to say that again, I think that the budgeting process and the documents that you've prepared do accurately reflect the priorities expressed. They're not just all my priorities, they're not just all other members of council's priorities, but they do represent the priorities that have been expressed by all of us. And so you know, I wanted to say on behalf of council, thank you very much to the team for preparing these documents and getting us to this point. Perhaps before we close tonight, Mr. Daniluk, can you talk about what the next steps look like?
Of course, following this meeting and council direction, staff will prepare the financial plan bylaw. It'll be introduced for first 3 readings on March 21st, followed by adoption on April 4th. There will be other opportunities for financial input and council direction in April and May when we get into the tax distribution workshop in the middle of May, followed by adoption of the tax rates bylaw. Then we'll be introducing an update on the long-term financial plan, and that will be followed by updates to the developer charges to ensure that they're keeping pace with rising costs. And the meeting following that will be the final one on the schedule, which is the release of the annual report, which will be later in June. So those are the next steps, and the most immediate ones are introduction of the financial plan bylaws on March 21st.
Thank you.
Your Worship, I would be remiss if I just didn't add to Rick's comments that we have taken a much more fluid approach to the budget in recent years, and we have ensured that we've got the room and the flexibility that if something comes up and we want to make a shift, we can do that and do that by the end of the year and stay within the legislation. So I just want to assure council that you know, there are things that are going to come up, discussions that are going to occur, and I think we do have the financial flexibility to deal with those within the subsequent budget adjustment.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. No further hands at this time, so check in with council. We've completed the business that was on the agenda for tonight, and so if somebody will move adjournment, I will accept. Adjournment has been moved by Councillor Hanson. I accept. Thank you all very much for participating, and I look forward to when this matter comes back on April 4th, and then obviously the big discussions that we have to have about tax distribution workshop as well going forward from that point. But thank you very much for participating.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Rick.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.